everyone, it's Thursday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. The world has ushered in the new year, but two wars continue. In terms of the Israel-Hamas war, the killing of a senior Hamas leader in a strike in Lebanon's capital, Beirut, has stoked fears of an escalation between Israel and Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. With Iran accusing the Zionist regime of being behind two recent explosions near the Iranian general's tomb, worries heighten over Iran's involvement in the war as well. Though Ukraine and Russia exchanged hundreds of prisoners of war, the biggest single release of captives since Moscow's invasion began, their exchange of attacks continues in 2024. However, some reports suggest that Western allies are switching their policies as the war prolongs. How do experts see the latest developments of these two wars? For this, we invite Professor Shin Sang-hyuk from Kyung University into the studio. Welcome, Professor Shin.
Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. And we also have Dr. Aidan Hehir, a reader in international relations from the University of Westminster. Good to see you, Dr. Hehir.
Good to be here. Thank you.
All right. First question to our Professor Shin. So Hamas's deputy leader was killed by an Israeli drone attack at Lebanese capital Beirut. And if I'm correct, this was the first time that Israel reached into another country in order to kill Hamas leader. Could you walk us through this killing first?
Yes. The apparent strike hit a popular neighborhood in the Beirut southern suburbs. Actually, this area was a stronghold of the Iran-backed the Hezbollah. And another thing which I want to emphasize that actually since 2006 war between the two countries, this strike was the biggest one, the Israeli's biggest strike. And then Israel has not claimed the involvement in this strike. But as we can hear many reports that the Hamas accused Israel of carrying out the airstrike. So I think because of this war, as you pointed out, the possibility of the escalation of the war between the Israel and Hamas increased.
Right, I see. Well, Dr. Hehir, Israel insisted that the assassination of the senior Hamas leader was not an attack on Lebanon, but there are concerns over escalation in the region with Lebanon and Iran potentially becoming involved in the war, as our Professor Shin already pointed out. How likely is an expansion of this war in the Middle East? And has the possibility of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas completely gone now?
Well, yes, I think it's a significant escalation and one which certainly poses a threat to regional stability. From the beginning, Israel said that it wanted to reshape the Middle East after the Hamas attacks, and this is part of that policy. I think it's very, very dangerous. It clearly brings Iran closer to the conflict. One of the features, I think, of the response to Israel's bombardment of Gaza has been a very obvious disconnect between the public in the Middle East and the action of the governments in the Middle East. So there's a huge public revulsion at what Israel is doing, but as yet the governments in the Middle East haven't really taken a particularly strong line. Rhetorically, they've condemned Israel, obviously, but they haven't done very much. Now, I think that's unsustainable in the long term. I think the nature of Israel's tactics, the extreme violence, the genocidal language and the genocidal tactics are stoking huge anger throughout the region, and it's inevitable that will, I think, result in some change in actual policies by states, particularly Iran. As for the possibility of a ceasefire, at the moment, Israel is essentially losing the war. It is not being able to degrade Hamas in the way that it hoped to. And it has put so much emphasis on winning this war, defeating Hamas, etc., that it's not going to sue for peace at the moment until it believes it's in a position of strength. And it's certainly not in a position of strength. It's losing international support, or more regional forces aligned against it. And you're only ever going to get a ceasefire, I think, or some kind of a deal if there is a sense that what we have at the moment is as good as it's going to get. And Israel certainly doesn't feel like that at the moment. So unfortunately, given the nature of the government in Israel as well, the chances are that this conflict will go on for quite some time.
All right, I see. Thank you for your point of view, Dr. Hare. Well, Professor Shin, let's turn our eyes to Gaza Strip here. The Israel Defense Forces announced the withdrawal of some soldiers from the Gaza Strip, saying that it is preparing for a new phase of conflict. What is the next phase, and how prolonged do you believe this war is going to be?
Well, the Israeli military forces announced that it would be beginning a withdrawal of several thousands troops from the Gaza Strip. Actually, the Israeli government did not disclose the exact figure, how many the troops they will withdraw from the Gaza Strip. But anyway, certainly they decided to withdraw several thousand soldiers from the Gaza Strip. And but the Israeli military forces spokesman emphasized that the move to demobilize some soldiers from the Gaza Strip does not suggest any compromise of Israel's intention. Their intention is they will continue to fight until they destroy the Hamas. And then the fighting is remain continued across the Gaza at the moment, and at the same time, the Israeli military spokesman emphasized that the warfare will be continued. I mean, in the year 2024. But we can see quite different the opinions about the situation happening in the Gaza. I mean, the U.S. officials, some of the U.S. officials and then the military analysis said that the withdrawal of the several thousand soldiers, Israeli soldiers from the Gaza Strip signals the shifting to the lower intensified pace of the war, even though the Israeli government did not recognize it. And so I think considering the situation happening and then certainly there is some possibility that the war could be end this year in the near future, but it is very cautious. Because that the Israeli government officially said that they will continue the war until they destroy the Hamas.
Right.
But the situation happening right now, we cannot eliminate the possibility that the war could be end earlier than we thought.
All right, I see. Well, we'll have to wait and see how it develops, but it seems quite definitely sure that the war strategy has changed.
Right.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Hare, after the Iran-backed Houthi rebel group attacked a commercial container ship, the U.S. responded to its distress call, returning fire and sinking the Houthi boats. And though the U.S. said that it wants to avoid escalating the crisis further, it also added that Washington would continue acting in self-defense. What are the chances of the war becoming a wider regional conflict in Red Sea? And if that happens, what would the global impact be?
Well, I think the chances have increased, certainly, given what's happened in the last week. The key to all this really is the position of the United States. And obviously, given the election that's coming up this year in the US, that's going to play a significant role as well. The US, I don't believe, has any appetite for a regional war. It certainly wants to defend Israel, but it certainly doesn't want to get embroiled in a conflict with Iran. I mean, a war with Iran would truly be catastrophic. But it's also worth remembering that the Middle East isn't itself united. There are clear divisions, obviously, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but even within the group around Saudi Arabia, there are also the divisions as to what to do next. And Saudi Arabia is moving in, is making efforts to integrate more into the international community, etc. And certainly, again, I don't believe it wants to become embroiled in any kind of regional conflict. But the nature of the international system at the moment is very much in flux. It's hard to work out what's going to happen next. And small, issues relating to the Houthis or what's happening in Gaza can have sudden, massive regional implications, and it could suddenly spiral out of control. There are a number of actors in the region, whether it's Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, that all have a vested interest in reshaping the Middle East, as Israel itself has said, but that can't be done peacefully. And I think the chances of this escalating are certainly greater today than they were when the conflict in Gaza began in October.
I see. So though many players of this war are not that much interested in escalating the war, we would have to just wait and see what happens because, it could go out of control. Right.
Yes, well, if you think about the Arab Spring, when that happened in 2011, that wasn't something that anybody particularly wanted. Certainly the existing regimes on the ground in the Middle East and North Africa, nor did the European powers or the United States want it, but it was a bottom-up movement that suddenly erupted. And, I think that there is a potential, again, for these unintended consequences to suddenly disrupt what is already a very volatile region and an already volatile global world order, which, as I say, is in transition at the moment, and various different actors will try to seize the initiative and move into gaps left by the United States as it retreats.
All right, I understand your point. Now, Professor Shin, I believe this will be our last question on Israel-Hamas conflict. South Africa has filed an application to the International Court of Justice to begin the proceedings over allegations of genocide against Israel for the war in Gaza Strip. How do proceedings normally work, and what impact would this have in the war?
To answer your question, I want to explain the 1948 Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which was drawn up by, in the aftermath of the World War II and Holocaust. Actually, based on this, the convention, the South Africa has filed the application at the International Court of Justice. If I quote the definition of the genocide made by this convention, the convention defines genocide as acts such as killings committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part the national or ethnical, racial, and in the religious groups. So South Africa insists that Israelis' actions are genocidal in character because they are they means that the Israeli people government is intended to bring about the destruction of substantial part of the Palestinian in Gaza. So they insist that South Africans are filing includes this application at the International Court of Justice. And then if I had some more details about the South Africans, the logics, the South Africans filing include a request for the International Court of Justice to urgently issue legally binding interim orders for Israeli government to immediately cease and suspend its military operations in and against Gaza. But certainly such an orders, known as provisional measures, would remain while the war is going on, while the case progresses. And but they certainly have legal bindings, but not always followed. This is the limits of the system. But anyway, the remaining procedure, the court soon scheduled the public hearings. The judges drawn from across the country will likely to take days or weeks to issue the decision on preliminary measures. And then after that, the court will enter the lengthy process of considering the full the case. This is the remaining process at the International Court of Justice will take. So certainly, I think this case will drag for years, I think.
All right, I see. Well, thank you for your explanation, Professor Shin. Now,
but by the way, so certainly the question was about how the results and decisions made by the International Court of Justice, how it will affect the involving countries. Yes, it will, depending on the results, decisions made by International Court of Justice. The two countries will be affected very much, but particularly Israel, depending on the decision made by the International Court of Justice, will be influenced a lot. I mean, if they maybe criticize a lot because maybe if the action is regarded as of the genocide, certainly Israel will face a serious criticism from the international community.
Right, I see. It's quite ironic how once a victim has now become a perpetrator of this very case. All right. Well, Dr. Hehir, let's move on to Ukraine. Let's take a look at how the war developed as the new year unfolded. Both Ukraine and Russia continued a wave of escalating attacks. Could you walk us through the attacks?
Yes, well, there was a series of airstrikes, both by Ukraine and Russia. The war has largely ground to a halt in terms of the ground offensive. Ukraine bombed Belgorod, and Russia also incurred heavy casualties in Donetsk. But as the year has progressed, I think it's clear that the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the summer didn't make any significant breakthroughs. Russia has largely held on to, if not very slightly increased, the amount of land it occupies in Ukraine. It has significantly increased its weapons production, and it has recently aligned its budget more towards a complete war footing. And in doing so, it is focusing more on aerial attacks. By contrast, the European Union and the US are not providing Ukraine with quite as much weaponry and air protection as it once did. And again, that is related to what's happening in Gaza. The situation there has certainly drained resources from Ukraine, and obviously it's also altered the calculus from the West's point of view as to their particular priorities, and that has very ominous implications for the situation on the ground in Ukraine. I think before October, there was a lot of people who believed that the war in Ukraine was slowly moving towards an advantage to Ukraine, but I don't believe that's the case anymore now, and certainly Putin and the people around him feel that this is the situation in Gaza has presented Russia with a real opportunity now to engage specifically in airstrikes in an effort to degrade the capacity of Ukraine to defend itself, but also significantly undermine Ukrainian morale. And Russia, of course, has a huge population and will continue to pour troops into Ukraine. So that's not something that they're going to run out of, unfortunately. So I think it's a very ominous moment for Ukraine, and Gaza has had a significantly negative impact on Western support for Ukraine.
Right, ominous moment indeed. Now, Professor Sheen, we cannot leave out, diplomacy regarding this matter. And the U.S. is reportedly quietly shifting its policy from supporting Ukraine's goal of total victory over Russia to improving its position in a negotiation to end the war. What does this hint at?
Well, I think the U.S. is rethinking its strategy for the war in Ukraine. Still, officially, USA government has declared there is a strong support for Ukraine. Well, as one of the action taken by the USA government is that, Biden administration include the $60 million budget to support the Ukraine, for the weaponry and other aid for the Ukraine government as a part of the $105 million the budget request. Of course, this budget includes the Taiwan and for the Israel and Hamas war. But I think despite of this kind of the official stance of the USA government, something is going on behind the scene. Well, very recently, the head of the Zelensky's, the friction in the Ukraine parliament, Mr. Arirang, at his interview, he said that the Ukraine's dependency on the USA and the lack of legitimacy strategy are the main impediments to resolving the conflict with Russia. And then NATO chief, he said that our responsibility is to support Ukraine and put them in the best possible place when or if the peace negotiation may start. And then also he continued at the another interview, he said that war is by nature unpredictable. But he said that the more military support we provided to Ukraine, the stronger their position will be on the battlefield, and the stronger their position will be on a potential negotiation table. So we can see something happen, and then certainly peaceful negotiation, I mean, to finish the war, to end the war in Ukraine, as an option, the peaceful negotiation is emerging and is considering. So we can say that we have to wait and see, but considering the policy changes in major European countries like Germany and Hungary, and then the situation happening in USA, as you know very well, the Republican-dominant Congress has been, quite shown negative response to the Biden administration's policy.
Right.
And so considering all of these, I think there are some possibility that the peaceful negotiation could be adopted as a way to solve the stop the war in Ukraine. But one thing more which I want to emphasize is that the response from the Ukraine government, President Zelensky, has been very strongly against those kind of ideas. But as you know very well, in 2022, just after the beginning of the war in Ukraine, many the experts, including former the U.S. State of Secretary, Kissinger, Dr. Kissinger, he emphasized the importance of the peaceful negotiation as a way to stop the war in Ukraine. So considering all of this, I think, as I said before, we cannot eliminate the possibility to use the peaceful negotiation as a way to stop the war in Ukraine.
Right, I see. Well, since our Professor Shin already pointed out the USA and the Ukraine's position regarding this matter, I'd like to ask Dr. Hehir for this last question about Putin's stance of this war. During his New Year's speech, Putin vowed that Russia would never back down, but according to the New York Times, despite his bravado in public, the Kremlin has indicated interest in striking a deal to halt the war as well. Could you tell us what Putin might be thinking?
Well, I think initially he believed that he could win the war quickly. I think there was an attempt to, at the start of the conflict, move troops into Kiev, and that failed. But since then, I believe that his policy has shifted, and I think he realizes that he's not going to be able to just overrun the entire territory of Ukraine. So his priorities now is to be able to leave the situation, to create some kind of ceasefire or peace deal or something like that, which allows him to claim victory by virtue of saying that I've taken a certain section of Ukraine, that he has taken over some of the land and what have you. And I think the war in Gaza has made that a very real possibility. I think a lot of people, like myself included, hoped that there would be internal opposition to Putin and this particular war. That clearly hasn't happened. Likewise, the idea that Ukraine would defeat Russia on the battlefield, again, I think is proving increasingly unlikely. The distraction of Gaza now has further undermined Ukraine's capacity to defend itself. So Putin is aware of that, and he said from the beginning that he didn't think that the West would be able to sustain its support for Ukraine, and now Gaza has happened. So from his point of view, the new goal of carving out vast sections of Ukraine and reintegrating them into Russia, or declaring them to be independent states and then reintegrating them, whatever it happens to be, I think that is a goal that he really does believe is now achievable, and it does look like it is achievable. Now, obviously, if the West says to Zelensky, we are urging you to sign an agreement with Russia, which involves you giving over vast sections of your territory, he's not going to be happy with that. That's going to cause tensions between, to put it mildly, tensions between Ukraine and the West, but also within the West as well. there are people who will see that as a capitulation, as an appeasement, similar to the appeasement of Hitler in the late 1930s. So again, this situation in Ukraine is likely to have profound implications for the cohesion of the West.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Hayer. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Hayer and Professor Shin, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.